In this video, I'm going to walk you through how I set up my development environment so that we can start doing our heavier technical work now that we've created our version 1 for our UI and UX of the design of our Bootstrap SaaS product. If you don't know me, my name is Sean Boyce, and I've spent years building successful SaaS businesses. This time around, I'm building mine in public so that hopefully you can borrow from my process to help you with succeeding in building your SaaS product. Subscribe if you don't want to miss a step along the way. In the previous step, we finalized everything that we needed from a UI and a UX perspective for version 1 of our design. Today, we're going to focus on building out our development environment, which will provide us with everything that we need to do all of the technical work. And then as part of the next step in the process, we're going to start layering the functionality as we break our design down into key modules and features. Now, I'm building this entire SaaS product in public, and I'm documenting every step along the way. So if you've missed any step in the process, I'll link to the playlist so that you can catch up. So why are we doing this step now in the process? Well, we've already designed and launched our official landing page, which gives us pretty much everything we need to sell. We've also designed and launched version 1 for our UI and our UX for the product, and that pretty much gives us everything we need to demo. So right now, we're armed with anything that we need basically to sell and demo what appears to be largely functional capabilities of what we're planning in terms of the SaaS product to be a solution to our target market's problem. We can use all of that to continue to get validation criteria as we go back to our target market, where we've done interviews or we drive traffic with ads in order to better validate the relative strength that we have thus far for problem solution fit. However, assuming all that feedback comes back positive, and thus far it has, for everything that I've been doing with this legal SaaS product and helping them solve their billing challenges, we need to prepare an environment to be able to wire everything up so that we can layer in the functionality and bring the SaaS product to life. So far, my process has mainly used both Claude and Lovable. Now, I'm going to introduce a couple of new tools as well too, which I've talked about before, but you're going to actually see them in action. I like to do most of my development still in Cursor, but also with a combination of Claude Code, and sometimes I go back and forth. I'll explain that when we get more into the technical work, but we're going to talk about both of those tools as well as part of the setup process, managing our version control by using Git, or more specifically GitHub, for which there's a couple of integrations. So let's take a look. Like I mentioned, thus far I've been using Claude and Lovable to work on both the landing page and the UI design. So first things first is we need a way to manage the code. So we're going to use that version control. I mentioned Git and really GitHub in order to have all of our code well organized and then pull down the repo locally so that we can set up our development environment. But before I do that, I want to show you one thing that I've changed since the last step in the process, and that is how we treat kind of what was the dashboard that was linked to the landing page. Now, previously, I was leveraging this as a way to kind of bypass authentication for now, so that I can kind of get into designing the UI and UX design like I've done earlier in this process. Typically what I would do is after I complete this step where I'm setting up my development environment, I would remove that from the landing page. However, what I like even better, and I've hinted at this along the way, and this is going to be a change or an update to my process, I think what I'm going to start doing, and I think this is going to help in a couple different ways in terms of taking a more product-led approach in qualifying prospects, is I'm going to turn that dashboard element that's built in a Lovable, and I'm going to create that into a form of a demo account. So as you can see on this landing page here, a change I've made since the previous step in the process is I've relabeled that button that was up on the top that was called dashboard before to now it says demo account. And I've also replaced the how it works button, which is the second choice in the hero section, to be the same as in see demo account. So here now if I'm browsing around and I want to click, if I'm a prospect or a user, and I want to actually see what I might be getting if even before I sign up for my account, even if I can do that in a self-service way, I can click the See Demo account and I kind of go right into what might look like a fully populated SaaS application if I had created an account and it was already providing me with value. This is going to be really interesting to test further. I've seen this done previously as a design pattern, and for a lot of people that liked it, it worked relatively well. I'm going to test that out here as well also. And then when we build out the development environment and start working on wiring up the functionality, I can continue to leverage this probably on the Lovable side, which may maintain my marketing site for an extended period of time. And then we're going to host our functionality, our actual app in terms of its UI, UX, both front end, back end, and database elsewhere, so that the two don't necessarily need to live in the same spot, at least for now, but we're going to connect them all up together. So As I mentioned, we've got both the landing page and the UI UX for the platform here on the Lovable site. Well, what we need to do is we need to push this code up into a repo. And luckily enough, Lovable has a pretty convenient integration with GitHub that is super easy to use. So I'm going to show you how that works. I'm going to push all that code up to GitHub, and then we can pull it down locally, which gives us a couple of really interesting things. Number one, we can continue to work with Lovable once it's linked with GitHub, because it will continue to make updates that we would like, and it will push those changes to the repo. Plus, if we pull down the repo locally and then we wire everything up there, we can continue to pull down any additional changes we make to this design because both will be linked to our version control. The other thing, which is kind of cool, is it's largely bi-directional as well too. So if I want to add additional functionality for the back end as I'm working locally and maybe cursor or something like that, those changes can get pushed up and can also be pulled into Lovable as well. So theoretically, we could continue to manage UI UX elements in Lovable while we do more backend functionality and database stuff on the cursor side or locally. I typically don't do that for an extended period of time. There may be a small window or overlap while I'm doing that as I'm building out the technical functionality, because at some point, to me, it makes more sense to just continue making updates to the UI on the back end. It's a little bit more convenient. So once I kind of have the rough edges for the most part for version 1 nailed down, I'll typically migrate away from Lovable, and or it may maintain the marketing site for an extended period of time, but not indefinitely. So let's go ahead and wire up that GitHub integration. I'll show you how that works. So up here in the top right-hand corner, we've got the sync to your project in GitHub. So if you click on this functionality, you can click on Connect GitHub, and then it'll enable you to connect to your account here. So I'll click that. I've already got my account labeled and integrated with Lovable because I've done this multiple times. But I'll click on that. If you haven't done that already, you can go ahead and wire that up just by putting in your credentials and authorizing it. As I mentioned, it does two-way syncing, so it's just asking me about that. And I can also transfer this as well too. Let me double check one thing. Yep. Okay, looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Link it up. Okay, I've pushed my project to GitHub and it looks like it's all integrated. Now I can view it on GitHub and I can do a couple of other things as well too. Lovable for the most part gives you kind of a randomly generated, but somehow a little bit on point in terms of what your project is about name. A lot of times I will rename that before I do this step, and I'll also rename the repo to be something more relevant to my project, just because it's easier for me to remember if I give it a name that makes a lot more sense than something that's kind of seems to be largely random. But for now, let's just go ahead and view this on GitHub. If you click that button, it should take you directly to that repo. Here's the name it came up with, Billwise Auto. Not bad in terms of automatically generated, but I'll probably rename that just because it'll make it a little bit easier. And then in here, what I can show you, it even has the full history, which is great. Even though we just linked it to GitHub, it's got the full history now. So if I click here where it's got the number of commits, you can see every time we've requested a change in Lovable, it's synced it with this repo. So we have not just it linked to the repo now on GitHub, but we have the full version history as well too, which is great. And then we can use the configuration here to pull our repo down locally to set up our cursor environment. So as I mentioned, I like to kind of rename the repo so that it's something that I can remember. We already have a name for this project and a domain picked up. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rename this repo so that it keeps it consistent throughout the life of the project. So all I need to do that is come into the settings here and then find the repo name, and then I can make changes to it. So it's got Billwise Auto right now. I'm going to change that to Clockless, which is the name of the app. See if that works okay. Checking to make sure that the name is valid. I'm going to let it finish its check, and then I'm going to try to rename it. So let's try to do that, and then this. Okay, there we go. It's as easy as that. Now we have a name that is associated with the project for our repo. Okay, so our repo has been renamed. I'm going to go back to Lovable and then try to come back to GitHub just to make sure to show you that everything is still linked. So if I flip back to Lovable, here you can see the same spot that we were before. I'll refresh just because. Now, if I click this View on GitHub button, it should take me back to the same repo with the new name. Cool, looks good. We're in a good spot there. One other thing I'm going to check, since we're here, and because I'm a stickler about keeping all these things consistent, I'm going to go back to see what the name of Lovable is for the project, and that's the same as well too, Clockless. Great, all good stuff, very consistent. We're good to go in terms of linking Lovable to our repo and having our repo with a relevant name. that matches the name in Lovable. As you can tell, I'm particular about some of these details. Okay, next step in the process is we're going to pull down the repo locally to begin the process of setting up our development environment. So the next step in the process is to clone the repo locally and then set up our development environment in Cursor. So let me show you how I typically do that. So I'm back to my repo. You've got a couple of options here, and it's under this code button. So if I click this drop down, it shows me those options. Typically, I just do HTTPS, but you're welcome to use any of the other options here as well. Also, if I click this button here, it will copy the unique URL to this repo to my clipboard, which I can then use via my terminal to clone the repo, and then I can launch Cursor from that directory as well also. So let me switch over to my terminal. Here we go. Now I'm in my directory where I typically store all my development projects, and all I need to do is add git clone and then the URL that I copied to the clipboard and basically just hit enter. There we go. So copied it in 2 seconds, and I've got everything here locally. I'll just double check and make sure. Do a list, type to grep, and then I'm looking for name of the repo or clockless. Let's see if we see it. Yep, there it is. Okay, cool. So we've got the repo cloned locally where I store my development projects. Now what I want to do is I want to launch Cursor, but I want to launch from the project. So what I'll do is I will change directory into clockless directory, and I'll basically just use the Cursor command to launch the IDE from this directory, which is basically just Cursor, and then you give it the single decimal point to launch from the current directory. So if I do this, this should launch the application. It should launch the application from within the directory, which should have all my files in there as well also. And here we go. We've launched clockless. And I run this command as well also, which on the Mac keyboard is Command B. That pulls up my file structure menu. And here you can see my top level directory and all the files that have been added to the repo by Lovable. So that's probably as far as I'm going to take this video. The next step in the process is we're going to work on basically setting up the project in Cursor and then running it so that we can get it to be as functional, at least, as how the Lovable project appears in a browser window, but do so locally. So that from there, we can have our repo all set up so that we can track all of our changes, and we can start making those changes with the Cursor agent wired up to the model that we're looking for. But before I do that, I'm just going to walk you around Cursor for the moment so that you know where we're going to start from when we pick things up next. So in Cursor, and this is typically how I like to have it set up, they're always making changes and shipping new features and all kinds of stuff. So this may change in the future, but for now, this is what it looks like in terms of how I prefer to set it up. On the right-hand side here, I've got my agent configured, and this is where we're going to interact with different agents, different models. We're going to ask questions. We're going to give it instructions. It's going to be our key element to taking the project and building out the technical elements from here, especially powered by AI. In the middle here, we've got essentially our browser window, and this will show us files as we click on them. We want to edit them, code or otherwise. So that's basically where we see anything that we've selected. On the left-hand side, and this is a menu that I often have hidden or expanded or go back and forth with that, this is where we can see our folder structure and all of our files as well too, in terms of like how we've set up our project. So if we want to see what any of these looks like, basically just click on this file, and here you can see it in terms of how Lovable set it up thus far, but you'll see it in that preview pane, either view or edit, depending on how you want to kind of interact with it. Here we can make all of our changes and we can track those as well too. Last thing I'll mention is in Cursor, we're going to do a little bit more in terms of setting this up and configuring it. And one of the reasons why I like still using Cursor as opposed to just Claude Code is I can do more here. I feel like that's fairly well integrated and a little bit more flexible than just leveraging the terminal or the command line. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge terminal and command line fan, but for example, I can pull that up and visualize that and have that integrated in this environment as well too, which is what I'm going to do as part of the next step in the process in building a public in terms of this bootstrap SaaS with you. So that's it for this video. I've walked you through everything we've done thus far in creating our landing page and the design for version 1 for our UI and UX. We pushed that up to GitHub, which we're going to use for version control, and we pulled down that repo and started the process of getting our development environment set up with Cursor. Next from here is going to be getting that to where Lovable is in terms of setting up the project and running it, and then we can start layering in and breaking down those modules into features and then start working on those with the Cursor agent as we layer in that functionality. And as always, I'm documenting every step of the way here with this process and providing templates for you. So if you want access to those, it's all free. Check out the link in the description to gain access to those, and happy building.